Dad, can we get an archer? We have an archer at home. The only pile of rotten components more disappointing than the Bombardier as an HPG after Grey Monday. The arrival of a Bombardier upturns noses and drops stomachs. There might be a less well-regarded mech in the inner sphere, but if so, I haven't piloted it. The Bombardier was a complete and utter failure. It was a bigger failure than Capellan triple-strength Myanmar, a bigger disappointment than Alexander Hasek. It bombed harder than the word of Blake. It was a failure so abysmal that Wakizashi Enterprise was probably grateful that its production lines were destroyed in the First Succession War. They wouldn't even sell you spare parts for it for decades. Do you know how much you have to hate your product to turn away paying customers? But to understand all this, we gotta go back to where so many mech stories begin, the Star League. The Bombardier's reputation in the beginning could not be more different from where its reputation ended up. The Bombardier was intended to create a mobile, organic artillery option for the SLDF. Artillery vehicles, sure, are rugged and intended to operate in the field, but they can still bog down in mud, get stopped by rivers, they don't deal with mountains or forests really well, because you're basically the military equivalent of a bundle of stolen copper pipes strapped to two mismatched roller skates, size child. And back in the halcyon days of the SLDF, the moment you fired a piece of field artillery, you were on the clock for a counter-battery radar to dime you out to the nearest enemy aerospace or artillery asset. Now, if you're in open terrain, you can pack up and be gone like that. But if you're on a narrow logging road in a dense forest and you gotta make a 13-point turn to get out of there, welp, I hope your affairs are in order. The Bombardier meant your artillery could conquer any terrain a battle mech could, and be long gone before retribution came calling. And in the military, organic doesn't mean a 50% markup at your local grocery store. It means you bring it with you. So instead of Mech Warrior Miguel trying to dial up a separate artillery unit who might be on a different frequency or might be busy solving someone else's problems with the application of high explosives, instead, they just call their lance mate in a Bombardier and point at whatever battlefield feature or enemy unit they want sent to the Eternity Ward. And the original Bombardier performed so well, the SDF gave some consideration to retiring their vehicle-mounted artillery entirely. Let me say that again. They were going to retire their vehicle-mounted artillery for the Bombardier, which leads me to believe they were also fans of Canopian marching powder. But then the First Succession War happened, and the hyper-specialization doctrine and this sweet summer child at birth were both fed into a wood chipper. Because in a knockdown, drag-out total war, hyper-specialization becomes a luxury you can't afford. But it wasn't just specialization that was the problem. Fire support mechs had been a thing for centuries by the time the Bombardier came around. Even if it was a great value archer, it still could have had, well, value, maybe just not great. Especially in the Succession Wars, when any mech with so much as a BB gun was desperately needed at the front lines. No, the Bombardier's real downfall came to one of the most asinine features I've ever heard of. Prepare yourself. Proprietary ammunition. Look, as custom and non-modular as Intersphere mechs can get, there was at least an attempt at standardization when it came to ammunition. But Wakizashi designed the original missile launchers to take their own specialty ammunition. Bombardier artillery missiles. Sure, the first casualty in war is truth, but the second is plentiful ammunition supplies. And the Bombardier not only had less onboard ammunition storage than comparable mechs, but it couldn't just go borrow a cup of sugar from other mechs' LRM supply stocks when it ran low. Compounding that, no joke, an archer can shoot about 24 salvos before it runs dry. A catapult can shoot about 32. The Bombardier? 12. The Bombardier, the official mech of, I swear baby, this never happens. An initial proposed patch was to have dedicated supply vehicles follow Bombardiers around, but I mean that goes against the entire ethos for why this mech exists. Just use regular artillery vehicles in that case. There were only 800 Bombardiers in service when the First Succession War started, and a surprising number of them survived. The reason? They were so useless they literally served no purpose on the battlefield. The first model, the Bombardier 10D, only had missile launchers. Not so much as an emotional support small laser for this one-trick pony from a more enlightened era. But wait, you say, what's this, up on top of the chassis? Well, this vestigial laser is nothing more than a flaccid directional rangefinder. No, really, baby, I swear, this never happens to me. But what about the myths? I don't know, but as the Charger proves, if this thing could have fought a melee, it would have, and with only 800 miles and no factory, it would probably have gone extinct in that case. Given that in the Intersphere's most desperate hour it got shuffled off to the periphery, I'm assuming those were just for flipping your enemy the bird from safely outside of autocannon range. Quick side note here, mech variant designations are one of the most maddening things in my research. The BMD-10D is the oldest model designation we have hard records for, and even though the BMD-5A is a smaller number and lower alphabetical designation, it came out 200 years after the 12D. You're the reason Mommy left to live with Daryl! If you know why mech designations are like this, please send a paragraph to please step on me elemental lady at houseleow.noticemeconray.biz. Where was I? Oh yeah.
Failure.
The Bombardier got moved from frontline units, then to core militia units, then regifted to periphery militia units, then moved to the dusty back room of mech storage facilities surrounded by faded SLDF recruitment pamphlets dripping with hantavirus. A repeating cycle of excitement followed by disappointment as each new owner figured out that their transformer was actually a GoBot. And then they started scheming how to shuffle it off to the next sucker. But why did Wakizashi do this? Their bread and butter is aerospace. They had already made the Slayer. They were a few decades out from inventing the Shalone. All they had to do was keep cashing the aerospace checks from the First Lord and Coordinator and rolling around in resulting stacks of Comstar funbucks. Why try and reinvent the longbow or the archer? Well, we don't know for sure. Wakizashi isn't volunteering why they decided to pull a Michael Jordan and start playing Mech League Baseball. And I'm not going to Dover to ask, because that's a great way to get taken out back behind the dumpsters and get tuned up by some corporate security goons with extendable batons. Now, I'm not falling for that again. But I've got a theory of the case. So, Wakizashi's Slayer had been around for 100 years by that point, and it was an aerospace knife fighter, meant for up-close kills. But in the early 2700s, as part of the SLDF's Let's All Play Nice and Share initiative, Wakizashi started producing the Defender, which was designed not to fight aerospace fighters, but other conventional fighters, VTOLs, and battle mechs using missiles, primarily LRMs. So as a result, afterwards, Wakizashi now had the tooling and engineering expertise to produce long-range attack capability. So if you've already got that, and you're already building the Defender, why not double dip into the SLDF feeding trough with a mech that just shot at things from a distance, and didn't require understanding anything about actual mech combat? And even better, with the proprietary missiles means they gotta keep coming back to you for the ammunition. As long as they don't fire more than 12 salvos per battle, everyone's happy. Good job, everyone. Go home early. I've got a 3 p.m. tea time over the country club.
But sir, what if the enemy mechs get to close range?
I don't know, make it fast or something. Bye. So that's the whole sorry tale of the rise and the fall of the poor Bombardier. Born in a more sophisticated world and wholly unsuited for the Mad Max Shikataganai world it inherited. Its ignominious crash and burn got Wakizashi out of the mech production business for 300 years and the mech design business for permanent. But that's not the end of the Bombardier's story. Because the doctrinal concept behind the Bombardier, if not the Bombardier itself, has kinda gotten its redemption arc. Bombardier. Bombardier. Bombardier? Bombardier! It started modestly, swapping out the BMW seat warmer subscription-esque DRM known as the Bombardier artillery missiles, and replacing them with good old-fashioned LRMs and SRMs. Now, don't get me wrong, that didn't make it the equal to the Archer or the Longbow, although the speed is nice. We all get so used to being limited to 65 kph in any mech bigger than an elemental, but this thing moves like your booty call just texted you up at midnight on a Saturday. Although the speed does exacerbate the loss of my legal case in the people of the state of California versus my lumbar region. But like a protagonist on a hero's journey, the Bombardier has come back home, forever changed. The Raven Alliance started manufacturing them with a Shogunga Aero 4 launcher, achieving the kind of long-range, accurate artillery fire that underlay the original Bombardier concept. However, in a concession to reality, it also carries 3 rocket launcher 20s, so if you do find yourself in a sticky situation, you've got some chance to extricate yourself and get back to long-range sniping. The Draconis Combine has also refit old mothballed units into the 10K to hold multi-missile launchers, further bringing the Bombardier out of near extinction and into the 32nd century. Although apparently the bulk of these are from a full battalion of these mechs that Wakazashi forgot about in some storage facility like a desert graveyard of so many Atari ET cartridges. Allegedly, Wakazashi is being investigated for a breach of a few hundred years old contract by the Draconis Combine, which, if anything, tells you that the dragon never forgets and very rarely forgives. And there's a non-zero chance heads will roll, which, for the Combine, is not a figure of speech. At this point, even with a renewed interest in the mech leading it to a production restart, I wouldn't be surprised if Wakazashi offloads production or sells it to another manufacturer entirely, given that the Bombardier keeps coming back to bite them like a tenacious bedbug infestation. Look, I'd love to just trash the Bombardier, but the truth is, if you can find this on Discount Dan or Hal Whittington's lot...
Has your ride been repossessed, or do you find yourself dispossessed? Well, come on down to Hal Whittington's Mech dealership in Galliport, where you don't have to steal to get a deal. We got new Wolverine 8Cs, only $29,999,935. Looking for something fuel efficient? We are overstocked on Locust 3Ms. You might call it a plague. We call it 1550, 715 too. Good MRB ratings, bad MRB ratings, no MRB ratings, no problem. Ask about our pre-owned Solaris specials, priced to move, with each come with a complimentary premium hose out and air freshener. Here at Hal Whittington's, we're declaring a trial of annihilation on high prices. Take a look at our line of import models from beyond the periphery, including the Sporty Dasher for $37.37 Come on down to Hal Whittington's of Galliport and tell them my Surratt Spot sent you for a discount on our ceramic ferrofibrous undercoating. Hal Whittington's of Galliport, located at the intersection of Duncan Road and Cameron Highway. Come on down day or night. The only thing we close are deals!
So you can get it for a steal, since the common wisdom is that like a much, much younger sibling, this mech is a mistake. But that negative stigma means you can negotiate harder and invest the money you saved instead of buying an Archer into installing an Arrow 4, or an Artemis 4, or a raise for your Aztecs for putting up with your shenanigans. People underestimate this mech based on its reputation, but reputation doesn't mean much when it starts raining fire on them from 2 counties over. So what's the lesson here? Was Wakazashi foolish, or were they just ahead of their time? Personally, I think Wakazashi had a good idea, but they got lazy and they repurposed a high school paper the night before it was due and turned a sloppy first draft to a history professor who just found out her husband is having an affair with her sister. I mean, Wakazashi got real lucky that the problems with the Bombardier were discovered when it had only moved, several hundred units. If the Amaris coup and the First Succession War had happened a few decades later, it's possible any house militaries that adopted it could have very rapidly found themselves out of artillery support. Who knows what chaos that would have wrought, and given the likelihood that the Combine would have been a major buyer, they could have ended up looking a lot like the Capellan Confederation before it entered its borders-maxing Chad era. In that case, Wakazashi would probably have become a cautionary example, or hell, they might have ended up part of Rosselhog and ended up producing mechs named after Norse mythology. At the end of the day, the truth is sometimes ideas, like people, aren't successful their first time around. It takes a different season or a different context for their true value to shine out. We can only hope that if it's not our time, we all get as big a second chance as the Bombardier.